So we're back for another health and wellbeing podcast, and I have Diarmuid McConville on this week. And again, we're just going to go through his life story and how the last couple of years have really panned out for Diarmuid. And I'll introduce you like that. Diarmuid, I suppose, just give us your background.
Yeah, so Diarmuid McConville, I'm a recovering drug addict and recovering alcoholic, and I'm coming up to 5 years clean and sober now in 2026, 10th of January. So I went down the addiction road. I remember, I'll tell you from the start, like I was brought up in a good loving family, football mad family. Dad was football mad. He has his own business. Mum's a psychiatric nurse. Dad never touched his drink. Mum barely touches his drink nowadays. And life was, you were either doing well in school or playing football. And that's every young fella's dream around our area, anyway. But I breezed through school right up until about 5th year, and that was when I was 15, and that was the first time I took a drink. I can still remember it. And that was coming into 5th year GCSE time, and the mood altering after my first drink, because I ended up going every weekend, to underage nightclubs, but you're down and drink to get in, and you're acting sober coming up to a bouncer. But that went on, and I ended up getting kicked out of Derby because my results weren't the best. I ended up getting in St Paul's, and probably one of the best decisions I made was going to St Paul's, because I ended up doing well in St Paul's and getting me placed in Jordanstown. But my first time taking cocaine was when I was 18, just about turned 19. It was we were called up to the Cross Rangers senior panel. And with that, it's a massive achievement, especially when Cross was going well at the time, with Ulsters winning All Irelands. And there's always that, when you finish minor, you always that hope of getting a phone call to play for Cross. And I got the phone call, and it was after we won the All Ireland that year. It was maybe 2 or 3 days after. So I remember taking my first line of cocaine. And you talk about a love for something, I've always said I love my sport, I love my parents, and I love my siblings, and you have a love for a partner and a son and all that. But this was a completely different love, and it was the start of a bad relationship. You know what I mean? That love, a bad relationship with my addiction, which escalated over a period of 10 years. So from when I was 18, turned 19 to I finally held my hands up at 28 and says, enough's enough. I've hit me rock bottom. Life wasn't sort of worth living at 28 because of how deep I was in my addiction. During my addictions, I was taking it every day. It started off being that social aspect of it. Was with this recreational drug of fun times and being social and everything, too. You're isolating yourself in a dark room in Australia, where I was at the time that I held my hands up, and it was 30 degrees heat outside, and there was nowhere else to go but hold my hands up and say I need help. And I remember that day I held my hands up. It was just after Christmas 2020, and I rang home, and it was the toughest phone call I ever made in my life. Probably the toughest thing I ever did in my life. And, I had plenty of successes with football and life before that. And this was all these training sessions leading up was handy compared to the phone call I was doing to my mum. It was the fear of letting them down again and over again. And ended up getting home and ended up getting into a place in Camur to get help. Deep down, I probably knew in 2017 and 2016 that I had a problem. Everybody else seen it. There's people that said it to me, but I didn't agree with them. I said, somebody better crack this. But my drug addiction took me to places and things that I shouldn't have been doing. Between stealing, manipulating, lying, I owe a lot to my family for getting to where I am today. close to 5 years clean and sober, and it's the best decision I've ever made in my life, for the better. I'm getting married now in a year or two time, and have a great 2-year-old son in Donegal, which is eventful, but if you just told me 5 years ago that I'd have my life in order now, I laughed at you, that's the way.
Diarmuid, you spoke about, you remember having your first drink and you remember taking cocaine for the first time and stuff like it. For young people, hopefully watching in, that's, you're doing that as a bit of crack, or sure, it's only one, or sure, it's only once, not that. And again, like Pat was saying on our previous podcast, he was saying he's not against, shutting pubs or anything, but it's just to be mindful that, some people can go and do it and have a bit of crack with it and leave it, but there's always, that case that maybe somebody will take it too far, know.
Like where I think I've always had that addictive personality, whether it's been football or schoolwork or whatever, I had it be all the same. That was no different to drinking drugs. I was probably a gulping when I came to drink and very greedy when I came to drugs. I have no issues of some of my friends having a drink around me or that. That's their life. They can get up at 1 in the morning and might not touch another drink for 2 or 3 weeks. Where me, it was just continuous, where I was taking drugs morning, noon, night, 7 days a week. And I couldn't go to sleep at night without knowing that I had something sorted for the next morning, And for the young people, there's that social media has a lot to play in it, and they're exposed to a lot more than what we were when we were growing up too. There's a lot more pressures in lives, there's so much pressure in schools and sport to be the best, to win and win and win, where they don't see the mental side of things for young people or even adults, you know what I mean? That's the society we're living in. But the society of drugs, where I always say that people always get a bad name with having a drug addiction compared to, say, an alcoholic or a gambler. There's a betting shop for gamblers. There's a pub or an off license for you to buy a drink, but there's no drugstore unless it was pharmaceuticals. There's no drugstores to buy your cocaine or your heroin or whatever like that. So people would always seem to say with an alcoholic and thing and feel sorry for them, where the drug addict gets that bad name. And I've always said that drugs for me wasn't the problem, it was the solution. As I said, I grew up having dreams of being a county star, which didn't proceed fair enough, but to be as successful as I could as a human being, have my house, have my wife, be a successful person. But I didn't dream to be a drug addict at the age of 18, 19, 20, you know what I mean, and having to learn to live life at 28 years of age. That's the way it went down, and I couldn't deal with my feelings and emotions. And Camur in Athay taught me that we weren't, when we were growing up, it wasn't my parents' fault or nothing, it was probably more that macho, egotistical person where we're men, we can't show any weakness, it comes down to GA2, if you get injured, get up straight away. And I couldn't express my feelings and emotions for years, and that was down to probably my ego, and I remember the first time in Camur I started crying and I didn't know how to stop, because I was talking about a certain topic of its trauma and all this, and I couldn't stop crying, but I didn't know how to stop because I wasn't used to it, and I had a lot of disappointments in my life of family members dying and real big disappointments, and I never had showed any emotion, but this certain topic in Camur, I don't know how, it was one of these things, the relief of emotion came out, and nowadays I can show my emotions. If I was going home after having a bad day, I'd go home to Christina, my partner, and say, I'm having a bad day, or I'm having a great day, or I'm really, really happy, or I'm stressed, Life's not easy at the best of times, and drugs for me at the time was helping me get through life. Drugs made me more invincible, happy. It made me confident. Made me think. My addiction thought that I was playing better football when I was in cocaine, and because I lost a lot of weight and looked great, it made me even better looking. I don't know how that happened, but it made me better looking somehow. But it just takes you into a different world.
And you spoke about when you were sitting in Australia, ready to phone home and talk to your mother and stuff, and you were saying that's the toughest thing you've ever had to do, but it's the best thing you've ever done as well. So that's a big thing that particularly men speaking out and saying, I need help here. That's the toughest thing imaginable.
Oh yeah,
but it's also the best thing that you done.
Yeah, and that was at Christmas 2020, and it was a binge of 4 or 5 days of locked in the room by myself. The housemates was away for Christmas to Perth. I was in Melbourne at the time. And I just continuously using, and my mental state wasn't great. My mental mind wasn't great, and it was either going to go 2 ways. It was probably end up in a brown box coming home to Ireland or ring first, and that was that borderline of possibly suicidal or getting help. And I'm glad that it was the latter. That's the borderline where people see men as being weak if they start talking about their feelings and emotions. For me, it's not. Well, it used to be like that, but now the stigma of men has to be men. And I've always said this about my mum and sister and that. You'd walk into the house and they'd be talking about Mary and John down the road, but they're talking over a cup of tea. Where, like, if we went out with our mates, it'd be, football match was good there today, and that would be it. It wouldn't be how you feel or what you do last night and how do you feel about that. There's no emotion about it. It was just talking about general chit chat, where women will talk about anything and everything. But I think it's improving in the sense that boys are going now to coffee shops and having that bit of banter and a bit of crack, and you can actually see mental sides for men is improving, and a lot of it's down to a lot more things open for them. Helplines, coach, like mental health coaches. You'd see it on Instagram and these places. There's a lot more for men. Men sheds and GA. Dads and lads for GA. There's a lot more open things for men. I'm not talking about men in general. Women has a lot of things too. But for men, that's important to be able to talk about your feelings and emotions, because that's what could be holding people back.
And obviously, what connects us all and doing this and all is all the GAA. I suppose talk to us about the role the GAA has in all of this, and the impact that the GAA can have in helping whether young or old people with addictions or people needing help. How big of a role can the GAA play?
They can play a massive role. You can see it at the minute. There's a lot of ads about your gambling care, which is massive. There's a lot of, I think it's Colin Kilpatrick and Kilkenny Hurler and Diarmuid McConville is doing that, and it's going well. Clubs are doing a lot more health and wellbeing nights, discussing about addictions and the troubles around, and how easy it is to obtain drugs and drink, for younger people, and it is massive. I have an opinion that I'm not here to give out about the GAA ending, but my opinion is probably could do a lot more on the drug side and the alcohol side. It's nearly swept under the carpet a lot. When you go look at it, there's a lot more help for county start than there is for club players. You probably could be looking at something like that there. But for me, county boards, clubs in around Ireland are fighting and trying to help their younger people, because they're exposed to a lot more than what we were growing up. We were a lot more innocent, I thought, when we were growing up. But now there's with social media, with everything in it, there's so much more pressure on young people than we were growing up, and they're being exposed to so much more. So I think clubs has a massive role in it. But there is a borderline of crossing that it could go too far, if you get me. And it's trying to have a happy medium or happy balance to come across as you're doing something, but also it's about duty of care for their players and the young people in the club.
Diarmuid, brilliant for coming on. Thanks very much for coming on. That's the end of this podcast, and hopefully we'll have a few more coming up over the next few weeks and months with a few more special guests. So thanks to Diarmuid for coming on and giving us his story, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Keep an eye out on our social media for the next podcast coming up.